Welcome back to continuing drawing lessons offered by Portola Library. Today's lesson is going to be Landscape Prep Part 2 about perspective of cities, roads, and rivers. Okay, so this is an example of a city in one-point perspective. The viewer is standing here and looking down the street, and all of the edges of the buildings, the windows, the roofs, all of the angles are all going to the center point, the vanishing point right there. So the horizon line is right along here. Perhaps you can see the line across there drawn for the horizon line. With the vanishing point there, a way to check to see if you have all of your edges drawn properly is to take a pencil or a straight edge and line it up with your vanishing point and line it all up with all of your edges, and you go all the way down every window, every edge, the rooftops. You can see they're all lining up going to that point. And here's an example of one where several are not lined up. You think, okay, well, this goes to the vanishing point there, and this goes to the vanishing point here. But look at these windows. That doesn't make sense. The top edge of those windows goes way up here. And these windows at the bottom here goes way up high. And yet the edge of those windows goes way low. So this section is drawn incorrectly. The same with the rooftop of this little section of the building. It goes off over here somewhere. So you want to make sure you take your pencil point or a straight edge and you put it on the vanishing point and you check to see if all of your edges are lined up. This one's lined up, but obviously those are not. So that's the way to check to see if all of your edges are correct. Again, this is one-point perspective. Has a horizon line or eye level line, and then one point where everything goes to. That point doesn't have to be in the middle of the paper or the middle of your composition. It could be further over. It just depends on where you're standing. Here's an example of a hallway. And here, the vanishing point is just a little bit off center of the hallway. You can see that the bottom of these, it's like a high school locker in the hallway, lockers, and they all go to that vanishing point there. But then this line goes further over here, so it's a little bit off. Or perhaps the vanishing point is right there. Maybe I had it off a little bit. So the vanishing point is probably right about there. And even things on the ceiling will go down to a vanishing point. And so then this goes to here, and this goes to here. Again, to check, you just hold your point there and go all the way around. Here's an example of where you see here the lights are not straight to a vanishing point, they're off at an angle. So here the example shows the vanishing point right about there. So everything's going to that vanishing point right there. So it depends on where you're standing. Your vanishing point doesn't have to be in the center. And the way you tell is when I explained a while back in another video that you use sighting. So the way to tell where your vanishing point is going to be is that you go back to the lesson about sighting, and instead of using your pencil point to sight measurements, you're going to use your pencil to sight the angle of the object. So in this case, the floor and where the top of the lockers are, at the ceiling. So you'll hold your pencil out and match the angle of the floor and then transfer that angle to your paper, and where the two meet, that is where your vanishing point is. So you let the objects, the edges of the objects, determine where the vanishing point is going to be. The same with the city. You would take and sight your angle to determine where your vanishing point is going to be. So the building itself, the edges of the building, the edges of the windows determine where your vanishing point is going to be. Okay, this is a painting by Van Gogh, and these extra lines are on here to show where everything, all the edges go to the vanishing point, and the red line is the horizon line. It's hard to think of a horizon line when you're inside a building because you think of nature, you think of the edge of the ocean, you think of the bottom of the mountains, but even indoors, your eye level line determines where things vanish to a vanishing point. So this is 1 point perspective again, and it shows that all these edges are going to the 1 point. So this here in the bed, this is not an edge, it's an implied edge. So you have the top of the post there, the top of the post there, and determine where that one will go, you have to line it up with the vanishing point. So you know how high to make the post in the background so that it doesn't look like it's falling off the paper, so to speak. You want to make sure it looks in proper proportions. So everything that's facing you straight on, like this here, and in the city, everything that's straight on is going to be true to its shape. So it's not going to be changed or askew because of vanishing to the vanishing point. It's straight, square or rectangle, same here, same here, same here, and then same with the front of the bed. So these shapes do not go off to any vanishing point. They're the true shape. Okay, if you remember before the video started, you were emailed 2 assignments to draw your shoe and draw the corner of your room, to get an idea of your progress from the beginning of the class, before the video lesson started, to the end of the class. So here's an example of a corner of a room, so you get an idea of how it should be drawn. Here's the far corner, here's the ceiling and the floor, and notice these lines all go off to a vanishing point that's actually off the paper. There's little dotted lines that I added here to show that it comes off to about here. This side is a little bit easier to see perhaps because this ceiling goes to the vanishing point right here, and this floor goes to the vanishing point there. So the thing that's important is that everything in the room, all the edges, are going to go on this side of the wall, are going to go to that vanishing point, and everything on this side, these edges of the window, edge of the table, on this side, here is going to go there, here is going to go there, here is going to go there, and so forth. So that's the way you tell if you're drawing all of these things correctly. And then this here should go to the vanishing point over here on this side. And here's an example just of the layout. Here's your corner, here's the ceiling, here's the floor, and here's how everything on this side goes to that vanishing point, and everything on this side goes to that vanishing point. So this is 2-point perspective. There's 2 vanishing points. This is a corner. This is an interior corner. Then if you have an exterior corner, like in a house that you might put in a landscape or a barn, here's your corner again, but here it's coming towards you. This goes off to a vanishing point. This goes to the vanishing point, and so forth. And the way you tell is when you sight in the angle, put your pencil out to get your angle correct, transfer that angle onto the paper, determine where your horizon line is, which is where your eye level is, depending if you're standing or sitting. Then when you get your vanishing point, then line up all of your edges. These side edges of the roof should be parallel to each other. This does not go to the vanishing point. Many students make the mistake of taking every corner and putting them to the vanishing point, but not every corner goes to the vanishing point. And another thing that's important is the corner of this roof and the corner here, even though it's not an edge, they line up to the vanishing point also on this side. So this can be something that would be good to practice. Draw some cubes and turn them, take a cube or square and turn it so that you have a corner, and practice drawing, or go outside and look at some houses and draw the corner and see if you can get the perspective. If you get a couple examples, then you could use those examples to put in your final landscape drawing that you'll do for this course. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to draw a winding road or a path or a river in perspective, because most likely you would want to add a river or a path or something like that in your composition to lead the eye into the format, as I've done in my river painting over here. I have a winding river leading you into the composition. So there's going to be more than one vanishing point as it meanders back and forth into the distance. So this one, it shows, this is labeled vanishing point 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it starts out here, and what you do is you would also use sighting to get the correct angle, transfer that angle onto your paper, and then you have an imaginary line that goes across, straight across, horizontal across, and then these corners, as it turns to go this way, go off to another vanishing point, again sighting it in. But then you would want to do like it's done here and round off the corners, because a path or a road wouldn't have such sharp turns. It wouldn't look natural. So as you can see, this goes off to this vanishing point, this goes off to this vanishing point, again cutting it off there. These two corners go off to this vanishing point, and then cutting it off here, and then it goes off to here. The mistake that many students make is that they'll draw, they'll go here, and then they'll turn here, and then they go straight up from here. And the road doesn't go straight up. The cars don't want to drive straight up a mountain. You need to have it get, if you notice, it gets smaller, narrower, and narrower, and narrower as it goes into the distance. And then it looks like it's actually on the ground, not up in the air floating, and it looks more natural. Okay, so to help you to see this a little bit better, I'm going to shade in. This is the first section of the road, and then this is where it cuts off. And then these corners go off to this vanishing point, and you can see it goes off this direction, and then it goes to this vanishing point, and it goes off in this direction, and turns again one more time and goes off in this direction. So you can see how it meanders through, and it looks like it's actually a path on the ground. And if you drew it where it went up like this, as many beginning students do, because they can't understand how it goes into perspective and gets smaller and smaller, kind of like train tracks. You know that train tracks will go to one vanishing point, and get smaller and smaller, even though you know the tracks do not get closer together. The same thing with this, but to make it go straight up, it doesn't look like it's laying on the ground. It looks like it's a slide for a playground, so that it's just not natural. So here's an example of a path in the woods, and you can see the path is very wide in the foreground. The viewer's standing here. The horizon line is right along here. The sky comes down to the land. And as the path goes further back, it gets more narrow. So it goes off into one vanishing point, and then another vanishing point, gets smaller, and then turns to a vanishing point way over here. So here's an example of how to lay it out. You draw your lines. Here's your cutoff. Then it turns. The vanishing point is perhaps right about there. And then it turns again and goes off here. Then it looks like it's actually on the ground instead of floating up in the air. You want to do this for rivers and paths and roads. So here's an example of a local river, the Feather River in Portola area. And the rivers don't always have an exact size like a path or a road. Rivers get smaller and wider naturally. But as it recedes in the perspective, most likely it's going to be looking smaller as it goes back. So here it's quite wide right here. Actually, I think this is Grizzly Creek that flows into the Feather River. So then it goes back, and this would be your cutoff. And then it gets a little smaller, and then it turns, smaller again, turns again. You can probably barely see it, but it actually turns right in there and goes back behind the bushes. This path also has a little bit of a zigzag, but it's a little smaller here than it is here, but not very much, because the path is pretty narrow to begin with. So then you might want to do some reflections in your rivers. So I'm going to show you some examples. Here the water has some ripples, and so when you draw your reflections, if you leave some white streaks in there, it makes it look more like water. Reflections are a different value than the original object. So if you have a light object, it's going to be darker in the reflection. If you have a dark object, it's usually a little lighter in the reflection. It's a little hard to tell in this print. Perhaps you can tell a little bit better here. This building is dark and the reflection is a little bit lighter. And again, it's broken up here. This is broken up with a little bit of white ripples to make it look like water. Sometimes the water has so much movement, or maybe even ice, so it doesn't reflect in parts. And that's okay too, because it gives it the look of the water still. So there's a little bit of reflection right here, but most of it's down here. And again, you can see how it's broken up by the ripples. The dark areas are almost wiggly, wavy back and forth. But notice this is very dark, and this is lighter. Very dark, and this is lighter. And then here, this example really shows how light the boat is and how dark the reflection is. Notice also when you have an angle and the reflection below it, you need to draw a line straight down, because you don't want this reflection to be drawn way out over here. Sometimes people will do that. They'll draw the reflection and it comes way off, and it just doesn't look right. So you want to make sure that it lines up. If you're having trouble getting it to line up, you could use your homemade carbon paper, trace the top half, and then reverse it to get the other side, just like when you did your vase, trying to get both sides the same. Here is an example. What many people also get wrong is when they're drawing a tree that has a little bit of a tilt or an angle. The tree reflection will have the opposite angle. So again, you could trace this basic, the trunk and the three main branches, and then use your carbon paper to get the angle on your reflection. If this was a straight up and down tree, then the reflection would be straight up and down. That's another thing that many students get wrong, is they have their straight up and down tree, but they put the reflection way over here. No, it's going to be coming straight at you, coming down. So here's another example. Oh, and in this one I wanted to show you, you're going to learn more about this in the next video, but this is purposely cut, cropped, smaller. The original photograph had just as much space on this side of the tree as it did on this side, so it was a very big photograph. But if you put your main subject a little bit off center, it's called a rule of third, which I'm going to explain more in the next video, then you're going to have a much more interesting composition because both sides of the tree are not the same shape. Just like when you're drawing a line down the middle of a mountain, you don't want both sides to be the same. The same with the whole composition. You want different shapes on both sides. Here's an example here where the tree is straight up and down and the reflections come straight at you down. So you don't have to worry about the angles here because the tree is straight. And notice again, there are ripples because the reflections are drawn in streaks. A streak here, and then leave a space of white paper and another streak and so forth like that. And this is actually an etching that was done around the 1900s. But it still gives you the feeling of what it's like to do a pencil drawing. Here's an example of a city with the buildings in reflection, and you see how with the river going through the city in Cincinnati, the straight up and down lines are also straight up and down in the reflection. The bridge over here is reflected here, and these buildings are reflected here. So it gives you an idea that you can do cities reflected in the water, you can do trees reflected in, mountains reflected in, but again, notice how there's little white streaks across the up and down reflections to give the impression of water. Another form of perspective is called foreshortening. And foreshortening means that something in the distance is going to look smaller than it normally would because of the angle of looking at it. So here, sitting down, looking from my knee down to my shoe, if I measure the width of my leg there, it's quite a bit more than the width of my shoe. Yet I know my shoe, I have my shoe on, but I know it's much bigger, but I'm not going to draw it wider because it's on the floor, way below my knee. And so the way you tell how big to draw something that's foreshortened like this is you use sighting and you use your pencil to measure the width, and then you take that measurement on your pencil, and then you look at the measurement of your shoe. So say here, I'm going to measure, that's how wide my shoe is, and I know it's about half of the width of my leg. So then I know to draw my shoe that size. So you use the measurement that you take with your pencil, and you use that to gauge how big to draw something like this. So this would be good practice for you to start realizing what you're seeing is actually what's really there instead of what you think is there. So I think you should sit, for an example, or an assignment is to sit down in a chair with your notepad, sketch pad, and draw your knee, and then your shoe, your foot below. You don't have to have your shoe off because toes are a lot harder to draw than a shoe. So draw your shoe and your knee in this position for practice. You don't have to put in shading. You can just draw the basic line, edge lines and outlines and so forth. So that would be a homework assignment, in addition to going outside and looking at some houses and draw a house. Let me get the example here. Draw a house in 2-point perspective like this. You don't have to put all the details of shingles on the roof or shutters or curtains or anything like that, but just the basic shapes of a house in 2-point perspective. And that means you have to look at it from a corner, not from the very front only. Okay? Okay, so with this lesson you've learned 1 and 2-point perspective for drawing buildings, rooms, city streets, a winding road or winding river, and also reflections in a river. So the next lesson you're going to learn about drawing trees, and then we'll be putting all of these components together to make a complete landscape. So hopefully you've enjoyed these lessons and you're practicing doing some of these exercises at home, and then real soon you'll be able to do a complete landscape drawing. So thanks for attending, and I hope you've been enjoying the lessons.